don't put a lot of stock into the picture. I'm just popping any picture that's in my phone just to have something in the background, but just talking. So lately, I think I'll make a very reactive title to this. That's always fun. Um, Something like Guy Fawkes goes to see a medium or a fortune teller or something like that, because it just, I was reading a book about Tecumseh and his brother, who was called the Prophet. And if you know anything about Tecumseh, and I don't know, if I'm always told I'm pronouncing his name incorrectly. I don't know, but basically, he's a pretty interesting historical figure. And what I found interesting when I was reading that book is his brother, who was considered a prophet, was a little bit of he was a little bit of a fanatical religious person in a lot of ways, and it's believed that he might have picked up these practices by being around the Christians and the Shakers and things like that. But he would prophesy curses. He would also find people amongst them that he would accuse of basically witchcraft. He would accuse them of their version of witchcraft. I mean, their belief in their God was the Great Spirit, and their people was chosen to be the chosen people, all that sort of thing. They kind of took what the Christian narrative was and made it a very specific Indian narrative, and the red man is first created by God and supreme, but these people who he would accuse of practicing a witchcraft, their version of witchcraft, he would take to doing that, and then they would get burned at the stake. So it's pretty rough if you're to get accused of things. So he would go on these witch hunts, and we learned that Tecumseh wasn't very fond of burning somebody at the stake. He just didn't have the stomach for that. It was too much. But he must have also seen the sway and influence that his brother's fanaticism could have to help him achieve his objectives and his agendas. So it's interesting to just read and think about that. So my thoughts, and you could take 1,000 different points that are discussed and run a whole topic line off that. But what I thought when I was reading that part was the fanaticism that was used to help move their agenda along, and how many poor people suffered horrendously because of that. But at the same time, it's recognized that there's a spiritual world. I have to recognize that there's a spiritual world. I know that the Bible expressly forbids. I always think of Saul and the witch of Endor. You're not supposed to go there and get advice from the psychic medium fortune teller. The time he did that, now the sin in the Old Testament, the big violation that Saul did here, I think is pretty clearly established, that the reason he was not supposed to do this was it reflected that he was not putting his trust in God. Rather than saying, God, please show me the answer, God, please give me guidance, praying sincerely to God, instead of doing that, forsaking that to seek advice from a medium who would then channel someone who had died. That was the sin there. It's a lack of trust where you're supposed to put your trust. But I think it's also implied in these days that there's also this nefarious, seedy underground of dark spirits that work underneath in the hidden areas. And when we go to channeling or doing the psychic stuff, that somehow we are playing with fire. It's almost, I mean, this is more implied in the Christian world, but I think it's there, that if you start dabbling with the things that the Bible says not to do, that it's almost like you're getting involved with the mafia or a drug lord. It's like you're playing with fire, and you're going to get yourself burned because you're operating. You're like Breaking Bad. You're going into this underworld of evil, and you might find yourself getting some evil rubbed off on you and become a victim yourself. That's, to me, it's very much implied. I mean, is there verses that talk about protection, divine protection, things like that? You could probably get deeper into that. But the real sin that Paul did, Saul, I mean, was going to the witch because he just didn't get a clear answer from God, and he wanted to find direction on what decision he should make with his army. So he went ahead and just bypassed the usual route of asking God for help, or he was asking God for help. Honestly, he was asking God for help. He was asking, and he was asking to the prophet, and he was silence. I mean, God was ghosting him, no answer. And it the guy could do, it seemed like every decision he made with God, it was the wrong one. I mean, Saul and God's relationship was very similar to the relationship that I had with clients in past companies that I've had. It was like nothing I could do or say was the right thing. I was condemned from the start. Saul kind of has that relationship going with with God, and his last ditch attempt to get some direction was to go to a medium. And that was the big sin, that he just established that he's not. And you can go back where he was not following orders that God was giving him exactly. And it's interesting to see where the true sin is there. But in today's culture, the sin is basically applied to this idea that you're walking into the unknown. So I did this when I was 9 years old. There was like this fair with my school, county, and you get those tickets and you could go on rides in different fun houses. And there was this tent with the lady in the crystal ball. And I knew really nothing about nothing. But at 9 years old, I go in there to get my fortune read. And this woman, she tells me that she saw in my life lots of conflict, and that my entire life would be riddled with conflict. And I've looked back at that stupid woman and what she said and thought, dang, she nailed it on the head. Now, from a skeptic standpoint, you could say a lot of people would align themselves with the conflict. If somebody said your life is going to be filled with conflict, a lot of us would say, yeah, my life has been filled with lots of conflict. So that's a pretty broad target to hit if you're just blindly throwing a dart. Was she truly receiving that information from the other side? I don't know. But in my life, the idea of conflict in relationships has definitely been a theme, where I see these other people that I meet that just blissfully go through life, and they're chill and they seem to get along with people just fine. They don't have problems at work, problems at home. They don't seem to have any of these problems. And they're just like the lucky bastard, why do I have so many conflicts that I don't even want to have? They're just petty. It's like it's like conflict is drawn to me like a magnet. I'm not doing anything. I'm not trying to provoke people. In fact, I operate trying to be a people pleaser. I try to make people happy. I try to do the right thing, but at the same time, I can't not say something or be honest about something or speak my mind when it comes up to me. It feels deceitful to just not say anything when I have a countering view and I think there's evidence to support it. So I say it, and that gets me into trouble at work and everywhere else. So conflict, she hit the nail on the head with that one. It is another side note. It's pretty effed up that this adult female is telling a 9-year-old that his life is going to be filled with conflict. Even at the time, I remember thinking, this seems messed up. What is it? Should she be telling me that? I remember thinking that back then, and I knew nothing about the Bible. I knew nothing about any of that stuff back when I was 9. I mean, almost nothing. So I'm receiving this. And I say 9. I might have been 10 or 11. I can't remember the exact year it happened. I just remember I was pretty young and I was at a fair and I had these little coupons. But basically, this woman told a kid that his life would be riddled with conflict. Then there's this phenomenon of mediums, and there's a lot of TV shows Like, and there's a lot of case studies I've studied just in my curious investigations of paranormal and different things that people have displayed some sort of psychic ability. I've come across these things. I remember back in the 90s, there was that one guy that was channeling lost loved ones, and he gained a lot of fame. And I remember seeing, and the thing that I found about it is he had some remarkable, like, insights on people specific that I don't the skeptics want to say he just reads people, he throws things out there and reads the response. Right now there's a popular one on Netflix, the Long Island Medium, and I'll be honest, I've seen some of her stuff, and it's I don't think I think anybody that were to take it scientifically and approach it, they'd have to. They even did that. They hooked her up to machines, so they approached it and they say, yeah, something's going on there. So she's definitely getting information that she should not have. I mean, I don't know how anybody can doubt that, but in this reality, the way this world works, I think if you are soundly convinced of anything, and if you're soundly convinced of your own skepticism and naturalism, reality will probably produce for you all of the evidence you need to re-support your firm ground position. So I can see how the skeptic is going to look at her and find all kinds of reasons why it's a fraud. But then on the same token, people that are more like me and we believe that this other side exists, we see confirming evidence, tons of it, that other side does exist. Now, for me, I'm not so sure that it's all benevolent. I'm not sure. There's not 100% there that she's talking to a lost loved one. Just because she knows information about details about their life and things that the family members thinking, that doesn't mean that her information is truly from there. That her information could be maybe internally she's got some way to read the thoughts of other people. Maybe there's some kind of ability there, or maybe she does get information from the other side, but it might be a deceptive side. We don't know. I mean, to say 100% that it's benevolent or malevolent, or if it's into it, I don't think that determination is there. I found it interesting that David Icke, in his book The Trap, talks about visiting mediums, and he visited one when he was younger who told him a very specific thing, and like 40 or 50 years later he went to a different person entirely, told him almost the exact same thing, which he said there's just no way these people had no connection with each other and they had no information about him. There's no way. There was a very personal event. There's no way they could have had this information. So they were, either these people were reading his own personal thoughts, or there was a spirit from the other side giving them that information. He determined that. He also determined that it was a deception because he found out later on that it wasn't true about a person in his life that they were saying had died and he had lost contact. They had not died. Now he's assuming from that, he's making the assumption that the spirit was malevolent and it was just deceiving him for, and it seems like such of a minor thing. I mean, it's neither here nor there in David Icke's life whether or not that medium was true, but the fact that it wasn't correct, but it was uncanny in how over the course of 4 or 5 decades, the same exact message was delivered by two separate people. He makes notes on that. I don't think David, and I did a video about, where does David Icke stand on the Mandela effect? And this example shows me, and I'm showing a Mandela effect on my screen. This example shows David Icke's lack of understanding or investigation of the Mandela effect, because if he understood the Mandela effect, he would have to say, perhaps at the time he was getting these readings, that information, perhaps he was getting that from a reality where such event did occur, and there was a residual of that event, but the current reality is matching something different. You have to, you find these anomalies in life, and you can't tell whether or not reality is just, it's dynamic, it's not static, it's changing in nature, and you just cannot say for sure anything. It really does muddy the waters and make it difficult for us. We who are here stuck in this place trying to figure it out have a glimpse of what's going on, but there's so many unknowns, and the Mandela effect makes it exceedingly difficult to really pin down what's happening because we're we're fish in a fishbowl, and it's really hard for us to know what's going on the other side. Our realities can be completely different based on so many factors. But the whole medium thing, and it could be argued, biblically speaking, if you want to take a very hard Christian and judgmental view, you could take the opinion that just investigating, just trying to get the knowledge of what these mediums are doing and how they do it, and watching even a show about a medium named Teresa, who calls herself the Long Island Medium, watching the show could be considered visiting a medium. I mean, I don't know that there's much difference there, except she's not doing a read specifically on you. You're just kind of watching her interaction and trying to judge that. But I wasn't really interested in the show. It was on in the background as I'm doing my stuff on the computer, and I couldn't help but notice this person's got information that definitely should not have. Now, I will also say this: Bible says, "Do not visit a medium." Great, but it also says that we should deal pretty harshly with someone who does, or someone who is one. And I mean that burn at the well. Bible. I don't see that burn at the stake. It's more stoning. You're supposed to stone them to whatever you want to call it. It feels a little harsh. It feels a little harsh to me to do that. If I'm going to be completely honest, and this is why I don't typically go to a small group with a church, because my honesty will come out when I have questions about things like that, and I make enemies, or people look at me cockeyed and weird, strange. So I just don't. To me, to withhold what I'm thinking in a group setting like that, to me feels like dishonesty. It's like, why am I here if they're going to express views that are counter to what I'm thinking, and I'm not allowed to say it, or I'm in trouble? What's the point of me even going to the small group if I can't express what my thoughts are on the subject? I'm just being dishonest about it. And if I'm going to be completely honest here, I'd have to say that the Bible in the Old Testament, even the New, I'd say, is coming off a bit harsh in God's position towards these people and the whole stoning. That's just me. And likewise, I would say that the prophet, sorry, I just had to pause for a second and get some water, but I would say Tecumseh's brother was a little extreme in his approach of burning people at the stake. I can't do it. I could not stomach seeing somebody suffer. And the ability of anybody to watch somebody suffer and to even throw a stone at them, I can't put myself in that mindset. I cannot relate to it in any way. This is the kind of stuff that I have difficulty with at church, and Christians who don't want to address. They don't want to address these questions because they're uncomfortable with it, because it implies that perhaps the Bible was written at a time where culture and the person writing it had influence over what was said, rather than God just taking over their hand and writing those words. But I feel like there's a cultural element, and there's things that people were okay with. You could also apply this to women, and it's always the women who are getting caught in adultery and getting stoned. I don't see it happening with the men so much. It's just there. If you just read the examples, there are cases in the Bible that I cannot say, yeah, I think God's for that. So there's my take on that, and that makes me unpopular sometimes with the Christian circles. That being said, I undoubtedly have had encounters with the other side, glimpses with the other side, interactions with the other side, where there's a benevolence, which is like God stepping in to save my life a few times, interact, pull me out of the ditch, And then there's the malevolent side that I've interacted with and seen that just has got nothing but seething hatred for me. And I've experienced these. I've got a list of examples in my backlog of sharing my thoughts. There's all kinds of cases that I've experienced to indicate that there's this stuff going on the other side of the veil, and I'm just stuck on this side trying to figure out what's going on. And admittedly, when this reality and this crazy construct that we're in, when it's raining down trials and tribulation, when my life is at its most difficult moment, I completely understand that I am drawing towards God in prayer and begging for help. I shamelessly, I'm like, what, I, whatever you need, you know, I, I am, I am cleaning up my act in every way and trying to be the best example of all that is good and get God's favor any way possible. Because when life is tough, when I'm facing certain trials, and for me, the last year has been wrought with trials, with conflict of all things, with work relationships, and trying to get to a place where I'm more comfortable, not in conflict, and not worried about the paycheck. And really, so many of us spiritually enlightened people in the Mandela affected community, and I've heard this countless times, is that the goal of this existence, the focus that I should have, is to break away from my fears and concerns of life. I should be detached. I should not worry about whether or not I'm bringing home a paycheck. Then I'm too focused on the material, and that's my problem. And to be honest, I'm not focused on my personal material gain. I'm worried about providing food for people who depend on me. I'm worried about shelter and food and the basics for the people who depend on me. I'm very conservative in my spending, but I did adopt two children who they one with Down syndrome. Honestly, the situation they were in the country they were in, by the time they were 16, they would have been out on the street and probably had a short life, and a miserable one at that, had somebody not stepped in to do something. And you can't save the entire world, I understand that, but we stepped in to do this, and as a result, it's been a burden. I'm not going to lie. It's been a burden. It's been stressful. It's been financially demanding, and I have to keep pushing hard to provide for people who depend on me. In addition to the two cats and two dogs that need me too, there are people who depend on me to go to work every day and make something so that I can keep the basics coming in. And that's it to me. It's a catch-22. I'd love to leave this world, this corporate world too, where people are so. Actually, the corporate world is just a microcosm of what we're seeing on the news. All the stupidity that we see on the news, the same problems are here. Uh, People have difficulty acting with true honesty in their work relationships anymore. They have difficulty with worrying about offending everybody around them. I don't know how work gets done, to be honest. So much of our time is wasted on ridiculousness, and I've I'm a strong proponent of believing that success in business or anything is matched and tied together with great honesty, transparency, and a personal level of integrity and trust between the parties. So for me, whoever I'm working for, whoever I'm reporting to, I need to have enough communication with them where I understand what their true wishes and desires and decisions and how they would make them, how that would work and how that would flow. Hopefully, I'm working with somebody that has a certain level of competence, because if they're complete morons, it breaks down really, really hard to do. But that person needs to be, I mean, they're still the authority, so I still have to follow it. So I try to align myself with their wishes and make decisions on their behalf that are correct. But at first, you have to do a lot of checkpoints, checkbacks to make sure that you're following and learning that. Once they've established a trust that you make decisions on their behalf without having to run every little thing beyond them, you start gaining momentum, because you can start doing your job and start making decisions without constantly getting approval. But there's got to be an integrity and trust. The minute I start lying to that person, they stop trusting me. When they stop trusting me, the whole communication channel breaks down, and then we end up in a disgruntled relationship, and it's failure on all parts, and the cost to everybody in being successful comes to an end. This is the thing that I try to establish wherever I am. And I think this last year has really ground that truth into me more than ever, that the problem with so many work relationships is there's just a lack of trust between those who are in authority and those who are trying to please those in authority. The trust relationship gets broken down and nothing gets done. Recently, yesterday, I had to send a very grievous email to the client saying that this is all stuff that I had no control over. I inherited it. But there's been something missed in the contract and services were not being paid for. And it's not the dollar amount that's the problem. It's the embarrassment that the person I report to has to receive, because that person was involved in the setting up of this agreement. And now, 4 months later, we're having to go back and rechange and amend the agreement because something was just blatantly missed, which means people were moving too fast. People were making decisions without checking all the boxes, but something huge was missed, and now it has to be formally addressed, which means this person might have to have an uncomfortable conversation with somebody above her. And the problem is, if there's no relationship of trust there, it's hard to have those difficult conversations with people above you. You have to have that position of trust where that person knows that you are honestly working on their behalf for the best, and you're not, and that you're competent still. There's a certain level of proving your competency. It's just a challenge. It's a big challenge, and that's the thing that I'm working with right now. But got off topic. The whole thing was this whole going to mediums and the curse that I received when I was 9 years old or whatever age, and that life would be so wrought with conflict. It truly has been. And then I would say that I married a person who seems to have, has not sought abilities like this, but just had, especially after the near-death experience. She came back from that with like a boost of just knowing impossible things so many times, countless times. I know that there's information being fed there. My wife's not trying necessarily to find it. It just happened automatically when she was young. Food poisoning incident, had a full-blown near-death experience, going to the light, talking to God, touring heaven, coming back, suddenly had clairvoyant knowledge of thoughts and people, and just nailing it, and seeing the future and things that would happen and events in the future to incredible accuracy, not trying, it just happened that way. I don't know what to do with it. Do you burn that person at the stake when they're not even trying? It just happens to them. They're just finding themselves knowing these things. It seems a little harsh to judge and condemn somebody who the only thing they did was they had an NDE, and suddenly they have this tremendous ability that they didn't seem to have. She had it in smaller amounts before, but it just seemed like it was given a boost, a tremendous boost after that incident. But how do you explain such things? It's difficult for me to go to a small church group. This stuff starts coming up, and then all of a sudden I get the stink eye, and I'm out of there. But all right, I'm going to end it on that note. Hope you have a pleasant day, a day that's free of conflict, and don't watch the news or watch too many YouTube videos to stay in that zone. And we'll talk to you later. God bless.